Good morning, everybody. I haven't spoken about Ukraine and the situation there in the conflict for a while, but it's possibly taking on a new and dangerous turn. Now, of course, it did already on the 27th of September when the Nord Stream pipelines were sabotaged, almost certainly by the United States. And the narrative in the West is that Russia did it. That's absolutely crazy. The pipelines belong to Gazprom. Russia would not sabotage its own pipelines and sabotage a very lucrative part of its economy, which is selling gas to Western Europe. Now, of course, with the sanctions that Germany and other countries have placed on Russia, they've said themselves they're not going to buy Russian gas. That's Germany's fault. It's not Russia's fault. They would sell gas to Western Europe if there weren't the sanctions on them. And they would happily, do that and do business with the West and continue to do business with the West. But with the sabotage of these pipelines, that's now cut off the energy supply in perpetuity through Nord Stream. Actually, it hasn't properly because one of the four pipelines is still intact. So if they wanted to, Germany could say, today we're going to buy gas from you, and there is a capacity to pump quite a lot of gas through the one pipeline, one of the four pipelines that's still intact, it's still operative. But they're not doing that at the moment. But nevertheless, what happened there was a huge escalation, and that was followed by another escalation with the bombing of the Kerch Bridge on the 8th of October, the bridge that links Crimea to mainland Russia. Now, whether you like it or not, Russia now considers Crimea as an integral part of Russia, just as much as we in the United Kingdom would consider Scotland to be part of the United Kingdom, or the United States would consider California to be part of the United States. Russia considers Crimea to be part of Russia just in the same fashion, an integral part of Russia. And it also now considers that the four oblasts in the south of Ukraine, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, are also part of Russia, an integral part of Russia as well. Whether you like it or not, that's how they think. And bombing the Kerch Bridge that links Crimea to Russia, they will see this as a terrorist attack on their territory, on their infrastructure. And that is a huge deal. And that is a huge escalation. And clearly it was carried out by the Zelensky regime, almost certainly with the help and backing, shamedly, of my country and Western countries, helping to carry out a terrorist attack in Russia. It's not something that our country should be doing. We should not be involved in this. We should have been de-escalating from the beginning and even from before this conflict started. That's been my view from the beginning. And actually now, a lot more people are questioning the Western mainstream narrative and coming round to agree with that point, because we have a new Prime Minister in the UK, for example, and the first thing he did, the first foreign leader he called was Zelensky. And then he pledged to continue supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes to win the war. Well, as far as I knew, we weren't at war. We haven't declared war. But this is just the subconscious coming out of these people. And people are now questioning, because we are in a time in the UK, as the other countries around the West, of intense economic pain because of the decisions made by the regimes we've had in the West and their financial irresponsibility and profligacy. Energy prices are going through the roof. Governments are going to have to cut spending because they just don't have the money, and they're up to the top of their heads in debt. And so, we're going to have some painful cutbacks in public spending, perhaps. I would suggest there's things that they can do to balance the budget, like cutting foreign aid and so on. But that's another point. That's another, the could be the focus of another video. But the fact is that going back to the Kerch Bridge bombing, that was an escalation. So, of course, Russia is now taking this far more seriously. They just considered what was happening in the east of Ukraine, in the Donbass, as a special military operation for 6 or 7 months. And the purpose of that was to stop ethnic Russians in the Donbass area being killed and shelled and maimed and murdered by National Socialists in Ukraine, which is what's been happening for the last 8 years. But now with the sabotage of Nord Stream, now with the sabotage of the Crimea Bridge, the Kerch Bridge, of course, Russia and Putin have now gone into a general mobilization. 300,000 extra troops are being mobilized to go to Ukraine and to stop the sabotages happening on Russian infrastructure. That's how they see it, whether you like it or not. The Western mainstream media tries to spin another narrative, but that's really what's happening. Now, in the West, people are questioning this. This has gone on now for 8 months since the special military operation began on February the 22nd. And not just me, but many, many more people are questioning, why are we just continuing to do this, giving a blank check to the Zelensky regime, talking about winning, when we actually don't understand what does that actually mean, winning this conflict which has got nothing to do with us? Does it mean pushing the Russian army all the way out of the 4 oblasts which were in Ukraine, which are now in Russia, pushing the Russian army out of Crimea, taking over the Russian naval base in Sevastopol? Is that what it means? Because if that is the goal, that is absolutely insane. It's not going to happen unless there is a complete collapse in the Russian government. And actually, some people want that. This is what some people are pushing the conflict in Ukraine for, because they see it as a wedge to get into Russia and bring about regime change in Russia, so then the deep state interests in the American military-industrial complex and others can take over all Russians' mineral and oil and gas resources and use them and exploit them, basically steal it. That's not going to happen. And, even if Putin goes, someone else will come along to be the leader who's even more hardline than him. But where this is now potentially going, that is very, very dangerous, is into a dirty bomb false flag. And the Russian foreign minister, Shoigu, at the weekend, lost a lot of face by calling the foreign ministers of America, Britain, France, and Turkey to say, look, we've got evidence that the Zelensky regime is making a dirty bomb and is imminently going to set off a dirty bomb and blame it on Russia in order to escalate the conflict. Now, he wouldn't have done that. I mean, this is unprecedented. You know, the hostility coming from Western nations towards Russia has been ramping up for months and months and months, not from the citizens, but from the governments, the regimes in the West. For him to actually get on the phone on a Sunday and call them and say, look, please take notice of this. You know, we might be, de facto enemies, but this would be disastrous. A dirty bomb set off over a city in Ukraine by the Zelensky regime, it would be an environmental catastrophe. Whatever city it's set off in would be uninhabitable for decades. I mean, look at Chernobyl. That was 35 years ago or more. It's still uninhabitable. And what it would do is then give the Americans the excuse and NATO the excuse to go in and deploy in Ukraine, because they would blame it on Russia. And of course, that's the immediate knee-jerk reaction that all of the Western mainstream media would pump out immediately. I mean, you've seen them do it with Nord Stream immediately. Russia did it. Of course, it wasn't Russia. It's ridiculous. The Kerch Bridge, this, and so on. All the other things that have happened, the false flags, they immediately blame it on Russia. Well, not the Kerch Bridge bombing, but other things that have happened. A dirty bomb set off by the Zelensky regime would almost certainly be the Zelensky regime. And then what would happen is that it would turn into a hot war on Ukraine between NATO and Russia. And this is what some people want. And as some other commentators have noted, Gonzalo Lira and others, the American 101st Airborne Division has just recently deployed in Romania. Now, that's very, very significant because it's the first time that they've been deployed in Europe since the Second World War. And not anywhere in Europe in a place where they can get to Ukraine in a couple of hours if they need to deploy quickly. That, along with the threat of a dirty bomb, tells you that some people are planning to escalate and get NATO actively involved on the ground in Ukraine, which hasn't happened so far. And thank goodness, that's one escalation that hasn't happened, but some people are trying to get to it. The reason why the timing is so significant and now is a moment of maximum danger is because in America, politically, the midterm elections are coming up on the 8th of November. And a lot of Republicans are questioning this very openly and very vocally, saying, why are we getting involved in this conflict? What's the end game? There is no end game. This is an open-ended conflict that could escalate financially, economically, militarily, forever, and end up in a nuclear war. And that's what will happen if we don't de-escalate. Not just Republicans, but actually, there's been a leak of a letter by 30 Democrats as well. Democrats in the same party as the Biden regime, questioning the escalation and continuing open-ended commitment to the Zelensky regime in Ukraine. Now, on the 8th of November, you're probably going to get many, many more people in Congress in the United States, in the House of Representatives, that are against the American involvement in the conflict in Ukraine and would want to wind it up, find an off-ramp, de-escalate, and eventually get back to normal. And deep state interests don't want that. So the reason why this is so vital now is that they would try anything possible to escalate this irreversibly and irrevocably before the 8th of November. That's why this timing is so important. The public in the West has had enough of this, particularly in Germany, where they're really suffering with energy prices going through the roof. France as well. There's been demonstrations against NATO all across Europe, which is not reported in the mainstream media, of course. There's a lot of under the surface. I know people I talk to around the United Kingdom are not happy with this. Hasn't been any sort of open demonstrations on the street, but people are questioning this a lot on social media. Even last night on GB News, I go on GB News regularly, but there was a segment where Dan Wootton had an interview with a former editor of the Daily Mail, and they were questioning the open-ended financial commitment to the Zelensky regime and saying, well, where is this going? What's the end? What does it look like? So even people now in the Western media, it's GB News, obviously it's not the BBC and so on, but people are questioning the situation. And especially as Rishi Sunak came out, and one of the first things he said on his first day was, we're committed to win in Ukraine, which is like, what does that mean? Oh, really? What's the point of winning if the whole world is exploded in a nuclear war? That's not winning, that's everybody losing. So to stop everybody losing and destroying our planet. Let's de-escalate, end this conflict, get back to normal relations with Russia, and try to find some kind of peace for all our sakes.